Disney Plus has just released its new documentary on the making of Obi Wan Kenobi, A Jedi's Return. And like I had pointed out in my previous videos, it highlights an overly simplified lighting scheme for nearly all of its scenes. In addition to this, the documentary also highlights another problem that not only this show, but also Rings of Power seem to suffer from predominantly, and that is being a lack of realism in their shots, specifically regarding their use of the volume. Since I don't just want to mindlessly criticize these shows, like I always do, I will offer my solutions as a professional cinematographer on how these issues could be addressed. So first, let's take a look at restructuring both the lighting and shot composition for a scene that exemplified the show's visual problems the most, and that scene being the final fight between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. Now before we restructure the lighting scheme, let's take a look at the original. Now as you can see here from the documentary, they used a large overhead source as a bit of fill light, and then used LED light from the lightsabers themselves as the key lights for the scene. This was most likely done to show the internal conflict of the characters through the use of color. However, this effect just comes off as muddy and it doesn't give weight or depth to the scene. When you're designing lighting for the scene, especially for tense, dramatic ones like this, you want to enhance a drama by giving depth to the shots through differing values of light and with color. And what ends up happening in scenes like this is that everything essentially becomes the same value. The image gets washed out in a single color. Now, as much as I would love to have a completely different look for the planet that they fight on, that creative decision probably wouldn't fall under my department. So how could the scene become more interesting and still visually tell the story without changing that dark green-gray background, and also keeping in mind that that background is determining the light source for the scene, that being the moonlight overhead? Well, I have two solutions. One for the fight scene, and an additional one for Vader's introduction specifically. For the fight, in keeping with the source that's established by the background, we would need to have a large light source come from overhead, similar to how they originally did it. However, instead of keeping it heavily diffused and acting only as fill light in comparison to the lightsabers, I would first swap this out for a light with a brighter output, remove some of that diffusion and sharpen it up just a bit, and then lower it slightly so that it could play off of the top of the rock formations, adding shadows on the ground that Vader and Kenobi could then pass through as they fight. Then, to visually portray that internal conflict, I would mock having cloud coverage passing by, which would allow pockets of light to dip in and out of the scene instead of just having one flat source. This could be achieved by a number of ways. You could use cookies or gobos on smaller lights, silk flags could be waved in front of the light, or you could even swap out a single source for multiple smaller ones aimed in that same direction, cornering off the edges of a few of these to give some of those darker shadowed areas. This would be the baseline for the entire sequence. It would not only look more interesting, but also show that internal conflict of the characters through the use of shadow and light and differing values of these. Next, for Vader's introduction, keeping this pattern as our base, we could then go from there, now mocking Vader's ship lights to act as the key light for the scene. When we first watch Obi-Wan as he waits in anticipation for Vader, we would hang a very bright light high up above and set it on a rig to lower down into the scene, fixed with a dimmer, getting brighter and brighter and brighter as Vader's ship approaches. Then as he steps out, he would be silhouetted, backlit quite hotly, casting the shadow of his helmet upon Obi-Wan. Now let's rework the framing. For Vader's introduction, the camera should stay mostly on Obi-Wan as he waits for the inevitable, starting in a medium full shot and slowly dollying into a close-up as Vader's ship arrives, with the light from the ship increasing in intensity. Then on the reverse angles, keeping on with a longer lens, we could begin on a close-up on the door of Vader's ships as he opens up and he walks down the ramp, kind of reminiscent of his intro in Return of the Jedi. Then switch to a full shot when they square up. For the fight itself, simply keeping the camera locked down on tripods and on dollies would greatly improve the tension of the scene, since it would allow the audience to follow along much more closely with that action. Now, the angles themselves actually aren't that bad, going wider for larger movements and closer for smaller ones. But the unstable nature of handheld camera work and the fact that handheld camera work generally draws attention to the camera operator, it's a bit nauseating to say the least, especially when combined with all the constant movement from the fight. Now to get to the issue of the volume and the false backgrounds, something that's quite prominent also in Rings of Power. As you can see in this shot, when director Deborah Chow reveals that the set is simply a screen, it's a moment that is a big reveal. However, in the show itself, it's painfully obvious. So why is that? Again, it comes back to the cinematography. Regardless of what image that is put on the background, as the viewer, we're essentially watching actors play against a flat image on a flat wall, and whether immediately or not, we will pick up on this. And the choice to highlight this fact by shooting in wider angles and with flat, diffused lighting only enhances this fact, stripping any and all depth away from the shot. So how could this be fixed? First, with the lighting design. So for this scene here, the villains are in an underwater base. So what naturally comes to my mind is that we could play with light refractions. If we set up a large source and angle it down towards the actors in that middle of the set, and then set glass panes underneath these lights with water moving underneath them for the light to then play through, we could have some really interesting and moving caustics to play off the table and the actors. Something kind of reminiscent of Roger Deakins' gorgeous Blade Runner 2049 work. Next, in using longer lenses and adding more real structures in the foreground and the background, just to give something real for that camera to pick up, would greatly improve the overall look of the image. Even something as simple as making the background windows real, for the volume then to be seen through, would greatly improve the realism as a whole. This fix could then be also applied to Rings of Power for its use of false backgrounds, keeping them to a minimum, only to enhance the set as opposed to using them as the set itself. Well, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more videos just like this. And let me know in the comments below, what did you think of Obi Wan Kenobi: A Jedi's Return?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.